Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, November 25th, 2025. Ambassador Chaz Freeman joins us now. Ambassador Freeman, always a pleasure, my dear friend. Before we get to the chaos caused by the 28-point Ukraine-Russia so-called peace deal, it appears that the Israelis are still killing people, this time in Lebanon, as well as in Gaza.
Well, it seems that the Israeli definition of a ceasefire is other people cease firing at them, but they are free to kill whoever they wish. There is no effective ceasefire in Gaza or in Lebanon, despite alleged agreements to stand down in both. The Israelis continue to destroy houses, physical structures in Gaza. They continue to murder people, including children, large numbers of them. And in Lebanon, of course, they have not withdrawn from southern Lebanon as they were required to do by the ceasefire, and they continue their aerial attacks, including the assassination of Hezbollah's military chief.
So I thought the United States, under this so-called peace plan and the so-called peace board chaired by President Trump and administered by that war criminal Tony Blair, was going to assure compliance with these ceasefires. That's a joke, Ambassador, is it not?
It is. These are fake pieces. They are not real peace. And no one is enforcing accountability against the violators. In Gaza, actually, Hamas and the Palestinians, after straightening out their domestic turmoil, part of it caused by the Israeli sponsorship of gangs which profited from whatever international food and medical supplies were able to enter the Gaza Strip by stealing them and then marking them up at very high prices and selling them, in effect, in helping to enforce the Israeli blockade on food and medicine. After that, Hamas has been quite respectful of the ceasefire. Israel needs to manufacture excuses, which it does. And in the case of Lebanon, it doesn't even try to manufacture excuses. It just treats Hezbollah as though the ceasefire didn't exist.
I thought of you early this morning. One of the websites I go to is our friends at antiwar.com, and they report that the Israelis barred an American surgeon from entering Gaza on the grounds that he wasn't licensed to practice medicine there. That, of course, is absurd, anti-humanitarian, repellent. The need for surgical treatment is among the Gazans is over the top.
I don't know what to say. This is the kind of niggling legalism that has given Israel such a bad name in its region.
Why do you think so many people refuse to believe that Mossad had nothing to do with the murder of Charlie Kirk?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we are living in an age in which social media immediately propagate and reinforce, recruit believers in conspiracy theories. And I think people are just very skeptical about this, that, and the other. I think it's very clear that Charlie Kirk was under huge pressure from the Jewish oligarch Zionist donors that he depended upon to return to the fold and speak no ill of Israel. He himself was, I think, realistically coming to the conclusion that Israel was indeed carrying out genocide in Gaza and acting in a completely illegal way with regard to human rights violations elsewhere, that it was aggressive in the region, and that it, as people have concluded, Israel rather than Iran is the main source of instability in West Asia. He was coming to that conclusion, and he apparently was a man of some conviction, and he would not budge when he was told to shape up. The Zionist lobby had a reason to hope that he would disappear if he wouldn't conform to their views. And I think that gives rise to the suspicion
Right.
that he was done in, but I don't know of any basis for that.
Right. What is the status of things domestically with respect to Prime Minister Netanyahu? Is he still on trial?
Yes, and on top of that, his own cabinet, the extremists in his cabinet, are at war with each other on various issues. There was a very fractious cabinet meeting where he apparently tried to restore discipline and failed. An argument between Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, with Ben-Gvir on the attack. The disorder in Israel, the angst, the anarchy, if you will, is extending even to the inner circle.
Interesting. Moving over to Ukraine, do we know who authored this 28-point plan?
Yeah, I think it was put together by Steve Witkoff and Dmitriev, who's Kirill Dmitriev, who is a U.S. educated businessman, Russian businessman, oligarch, confidant of President Putin. It is not, as has been alleged, something that the Russians handed us. That is a spurious charge. It does reflect some awareness of Russian longstanding positions. It is partially aligned with them, but not entirely. And it doesn't really have any official status. Of course, because it proposes a diplomatic process to end the war and produce a peace in Eastern Europe with Ukraine and Russia, and a broader rearrangement of security relationships in Europe, it has immediately been rejected by the usual suspects, those who have claimed all along that the only way the war should end would be with Russia back in its pre-2014 borders, with Ukraine recovering all the territory that it's lost, with the Minsk Accords suspended, and Russian speakers subject to Ukrainianization, with Ukraine going into NATO, and so forth and so on. Basically, the Europeans have never put forward any kind of peace proposal. Their idea of peace apparently is, Vladimir Putin in The Hague, reparations from Russia, and a Russian retreat from all the territory that's been fought over. That is utterly unrealistic. So the best thing you can say about this 28-point document, I don't call it a plan really, is that it does move the dialogue, the discussion, firmly in the direction of realism. And the realism that results, that is guiding it, is that Ukraine has no prospect of regaining the territory it's lost. It stands to lose a lot more if fighting goes on. There's no way to bring back the dead to life. Something over 1 million Ukrainians have died or been grievously wounded and disabled by this war. We don't know the number because the Ukrainians have concealed it while producing wildly exaggerated numbers for Russian casualties. So basically, the Europeans want to carry on the war. They want to continue the war. Why do they do that? Because they're living under the delusion that Ukraine can win this war, that Russia can be beaten. The only result of the war has been to reorient Russia away from Europe toward China, push China and Russia closer together. The Russians have held on to their strong relationship with India. They've expanded their relations in Africa. their economy has flourished rather than collapsed. They're now, in purchasing power terms, the largest economy in Europe. And somehow people, Europeans and some in the United States political elite believe that more of the same is going to do something good. It won't.
Don't the Europeans have intelligence services? We know of MI6. I don't know what the French or the German services are called, but if they are of any level of sophistication close to CIA or MI6, wouldn't they advise European leaders, hey, the situation is desperate. Zelensky can't last much longer. The military is decimated. They don't have enough human beings. They're losing more people per month than they're acquiring.
Well, if they were honest, that's what they would say. But I think we've seen a process not only in Europe, but in our own country of intelligence agencies being house trained to tell those in power what they want to hear and nothing else. And we also have the problem with MI6 in particular, but I assume with DGSE in France and with the German service, that people who are engaged in intelligence support of programs in other countries, in this case Ukraine, become morally committed to those programs and want to carry them on and reject criticism which suggests that carrying them on is infeasible. Think of the example in the case of the United States of the Bay of Pigs, a project which was absurd on its face, which people in the intelligence community, had they reviewed it, would have been able to tell the president that. But the program managers carried the day, and it went on, and it was a farce, and very tragic for many of those who participated on both sides. So this is not unusual, I'm sorry to say.
Right. You talked about Kirill Dmitriev and Steve Witkoff, two people who are not legally affiliated with or represent either of their governments as the likely author of this, but maybe there was a third author. I'm sure you'll pick out the name in what General Kellogg told Fox News on Sunday. Chris, cut number 8.
We have to put in supporting documents, probably an annex. That would be security guarantees. And I talked to Jared Kushner just recently, and I think we'll get those on the on the plan. But it's like a framework. There are 28 positions on there that if you read them, you know, it really does count what words are said in this, because words do matter. You know, when you look at what Santiano said in the past, those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. We don't want history to repeat itself. We don't want the Budapest Memorandum to come back. We don't want the Minsk 1 or 2 to come back. It's the United States that's going to guarantee part of this.
Jared Kushner? Is this the Kushner plan? Is this developer of real estate in Jersey City, New Jersey, now an international diplomat because he married the president's daughter?
The whole thing reminds me of 3 men who've never cooked trying to prepare a banquet. This is amateur hour. These guys, may be very good at real estate transactions. I don't know what Dmitriev does other than, what his business is. But they don't know a damn thing about how to solve a war. They're winging it, and they're making up stuff that, frankly, a lot of it doesn't make sense. The one thing you can say is that obviously Steve Witkoff, who has been meeting with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, has listened. And it's begun to sink in that this war is about 3 main things from the Russian point of view: keeping Western weapons off its borders by returning Ukraine to the neutrality that it proclaimed when it became independent. No NATO membership, no foreign forces pointing weapons at Russia from Ukraine. Second, the rights of Russian speakers, which were guaranteed at Minsk, which General Kellogg just blithely dismissed. on the same basis that French speakers in Quebec have the right to use their own language and perpetuate their culture. And finally, some sort of adjustment of the overall security architecture in Europe so that the threat from the West to Russia and from Russia to the West is reduced, if not eliminated. And treating this as a military matter, imagining that after two decades of statements from the Russians that a move to bring Ukraine into NATO would provoke a military response, and then expressing surprise and saying there was no provocation, this just came out of the blue, and in the meantime, refusing to talk to the Russians as the Biden administration did for 4 years. Antony Blinken, the then Secretary of State, never had a substantive meeting with his counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, never visited Moscow, did not invite Lavrov to Washington. There was no diplomacy. And it appears that those who are trying to sabotage the step forward that this 28-point proposal represents want to make sure that there is no diplomacy in future.
Here's the position of the EU. This is almost ludicrous and difficult to watch because of what she says, but here's the would-be commander-in-chief of the European military, Ursula von der Leyen, articulating on Sunday the EU's so-called peace plan. Chris, cut number 7.
Any credible and sustainable peace plan should first and foremost stop the killing and end the war while not sowing the seeds for future conflict. We have agreed on the main elements necessary for a just and lasting peace and Ukraine's sovereignty. And let me highlight 3 of them. First, borders cannot be changed by force. Second, as a sovereign nation, there cannot be limitations on Ukraine's armed forces that would leave the country vulnerable to future attack and thereby also undermining European security. Third, the centrality of the European Union in securing peace for Ukraine must be fully reflected. Ukraine must have the freedom and sovereign right to choose its own destiny. They have chosen a European destiny. It starts with the country's reconstruction, its integration into our single market and our defense industrial base, and ultimately joining our union. We will continue our work together with Ukraine, our member states, the coalition of the willing and the United States to make real progress towards peace. What is important is that we move forward as partners on a single track.
You know, for all of his faults, I think Trump recognizes these people are lunatics when it comes to this. They really are. Xi, Starmer, Merz, and Macron.
Yeah, I mean, this is really ridiculous. Everything she says is either a case of extremely unrealistic idealism, which denies the reality that is unfolding before our eyes, or is simply incorrect. I mean, the idea that there can't be restrictions on the level of forces in a country is belied by long history, not just by the history of neutral states in Europe, but for example, there were all sorts of agreements, the agreement on conventional forces in Europe between the Soviet Union and NATO that did exactly that, that tried to reduce the level of possible confrontation by putting limits on the number of forces. And the idea that somehow the EU, the Europeans, are going to carry on this war with Ukrainians dying is belied by the fact that they have neither the money, and they don't have the money to fund that, and they're not willing to put their own troops in harm's way, which means that the whole idea of NATO membership for Ukraine, which she didn't mention, but was implicit in much of what she said, Ukraine can choose its own place internationally. Tell that to the Venezuelans. I mean, really, it is just so unrealistic. It's shameful, and it will result in the death of a great number of Ukrainians who don't want to be on the battlefront anyway, but are being shoved there by their government. The number of Ukrainians who are dying and deserting exceeds the number who are being recruited.
Right, right. I want you to look at President, well, he's not president, Volodymyr Zelensky expressing the dilemma that he is in, a dilemma he would not be in if Joe Biden and Boris Johnson had not talked him out of that Istanbul agreement in 2022. Cut number 3.
Зараз один з найважчих моментів нашої історії.
This is one of the most difficult moments in our history. The pressure on Ukraine is now at its most intense. Ukraine may now face a very difficult choice, either the loss of dignity or the risk of losing a key partner, or 28 difficult points, or an extremely harsh winter. The most difficult and further risk are life without freedom, without dignity, without justice, and believing someone who has already attacked us twice.
Almost sounds to me, and again, this could have been for domestic political consumption, as though he would prefer to say goodbye to the United States rather than acknowledge the inevitable at a conference table and allow the inevitable to happen in the battlefield or in the streets of Kyiv.
Well, I'd make 2 points. One is the choice is not between dignity and the loss of a partner. The partner is departing because the partner has been afflicted by a sudden outburst of realism. The dignity is not the issue. More territory in Ukraine and more dead Ukrainians are the issue. And the second point I'd make is related to that, namely that Ukraine has had an opportunity, Europe has had an opportunity, the United States has had an opportunity to end this war on multiple occasions, starting with the draft treaty that was drawn up in Istanbul between the Ukrainians and Russians back in March of 2022. And there have been other moments. For example, I do recall General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, arguing that after the military success of the Ukrainians in 2023, they should seek peace. At every moment, there's been an opportunity. Ukraine has never lost an opportunity to lose an opportunity. The trajectory is very clear. If you delay, your choices narrow, they don't expand. And that is the situation that Ukraine faces. Whether Mr. Zelensky is part of its future or not, its people have fled the country. Many have been killed. There is war fatigue. The polls show the people want peace. They're willing to deal with the Russians. There are some hardline Ukrainians, of course, who reject any idea of recognizing the reality that they've lost territory. They didn't need to lose if they had followed the Minsk Accords. Those areas would still be part of Ukraine on a federal basis. This is a tragedy in the sense that everybody who's realistic can see what delay leads to, and it is to further suffering, further death, and narrowed options. So time is not on Ukraine's side, and it should stop pretending that it is.
And all of this started with the CIA MI6 orchestrated coup in 2014.
Correct. We bear a huge responsibility for starting the process that led to this war. I mean, we didn't make a decision to go to war, but we surely did very many things which we knew, because we've been told repeatedly by the Russians, would lead them to make a decision to go to war. We predicted that they would go to war. We nonetheless persevered on our course, and the result is the destruction of much of Ukraine and the progressive reduction of the remaining state of Ukraine to smaller and smaller territory. If this goes on long enough, Ukraine is going to become a landlocked country with no Black Sea coast. It will lose Odessa, and it will lose territories in the north that are, in fact, inhabited by Ukrainians and which don't want to be part of Russia. So unlike the Donbass, which clearly does, or the Crimea, which clearly does. So,
Ambassador, I'm sorry. I thought you were finished. I didn't mean to
no,
cut you off.
well, I think I have said what I need to say, which is Donald Trump, whatever his faults are, has focused on trying to end the slaughter. He began that by focusing on a ceasefire with no peace plan behind it. He's now come up with a proposal for peace, which could lead to a ceasefire and could address the root causes, as Vladimir Putin puts it, of this war. That is, to go back to von der Leyen's comment, to lay a basis for a long-standing, long-term peace in Ukraine and in Europe, because Europe is being torn apart. By the way, she said that the alteration of borders by force is impermissible. How does she explain the severance of Kosovo from Serbia?
Right.
Double standards are all very well, but when they're transparent and obvious, they have no persuasion or power whatsoever.
Ambassador Freeman, thank you very much, my dear friend. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
And happy Thanksgiving to you and everybody watching.
Thank you. Coming up later today at 11 this morning, Pepe Escobar at 1 this afternoon, Aaron Mate at 2 this afternoon, Matt Ho at 3 this afternoon, Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.